The Copper Beeches story from Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes tossed aside the advertisement page of the Daily Telegraph and said, "A man who loves art for art's sake often derives the greatest pleasure from the most trivial and simplest works. I am very pleased to see that you have come to recognize this truth as well, and that, although you occasionally embellish the small cases you record, you give precedence not to sensational cases that would attract everyone's attention, but to those that allow scope for my powers of reasoning and analysis, cases which, though insignificant, fall within my own particular field of interest." I smiled and replied, "And yet I cannot rid myself of the accusation that what I write is sensational." He took a glowing ember from the fireplace and lit his long cherry-wood pipe. As was his habit, he smoked his porcelain pipe when lost in thought, but preferred his cherry-wood pipe when entering into debate. "Perhaps," he said, "instead of concentrating on reasoning, which is the sole noteworthy feature of all these cases, you err by trying to infuse your writings with the colors of life." The egotism that formed part of my friend's curious character was beginning to assert itself. Since I did not much like this, I replied somewhat coldly, "I believe I have treated you fairly in my narratives." As usual, replying not to my words but to the thoughts in my mind, he said, "This has nothing to do with selfishness or vanity. If I demand complete justice for my art, it is not for my own sake. Crime is common, logic is rare. That is why you should dwell upon logic rather than crime. You squander material fit for a textbook by reducing it to the level of a fairy tale." It was the first days of spring. On that cold morning, we had finished our breakfast and were sitting opposite each other before the warm fireplace. A thick layer of fog drifted between the houses, and the windows opposite appeared strangely distorted behind yellow rings of soot. The light of the gas lamp, which we had not yet extinguished, reflected off the white tablecloth and the porcelain of the uncleared breakfast table. His spirits were not particularly high that morning. Without speaking a word, he had read through the advertisement pages of the newspapers one by one, and finally, abandoning his search, had decided to give me a lecture on my literary shortcomings. After finishing his remarks, he sat for a long while without saying anything, smoking his pipe and watching the fire. Then he spoke again. "In fact, you cannot be accused of being sensational, because in a considerable number of the cases you were courteous enough to take an interest in, there was nothing criminal at all. The small matter in which I tried to assist the King of Bohemia, the curious case of Miss Mary Sutherland, the case of the man with the twisted lip, and the case of the noble bachelor were not matters that always fell within the scope of the law. But in trying to avoid sensation, I fear you have fallen into the trap of ordinariness. Perhaps that is so, but my methods are new and interesting. Oh, my dear fellow, what can the public, largely devoid of powers of observation and incapable of distinguishing a weaver by his teeth or a typesetter by his left thumb, make of such subtle analysis and reasoning? Still, even if you have become ordinary, I cannot blame you, for the great cases of old no longer exist. There's no longer any enterprise or originality left in people, or at least in criminals. My own little practice is drifting toward finding lost lead pencils for young ladies at boarding schools and offering them advice. I thought I had reached rock bottom, but after seeing the letter I received this morning, I have begun to think there is still farther to fall. Read it." He tossed a crumpled letter toward me. It had been posted the previous evening from Montague Place and read as follows: "Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I am most anxious to consult you regarding whether or not I should accept a position as a governess that has been offered to me. If it is convenient for you, I should like to call upon you tomorrow at 10:30. Yours sincerely, Violet Hunter." "Do you know the woman?" I asked. "No. 10:30. Yes, that must be her ringing the bell. It may prove more interesting than you expect. Do you remember the case of the blue carbuncle? What began as mere idle curiosity developed into a most serious investigation. The same may happen again. Let's hope so. If I am not mistaken, the writer of the letter is about to enter. We shall soon see what color the matter takes. Before Holmes had finished speaking, the door opened and a young woman entered. She was plainly but neatly dressed. Her bright, lively face was covered with freckles like a quail's egg. As Holmes rose to greet her, the woman said, "Please excuse my intrusion, but something very strange has happened to me, and since I have neither parents nor relatives to advise me, I thought perhaps you might guide me as to what I should do. Please sit down, Miss Hunter. I shall be happy to help you." I could see from Holmes's manner and from the way he spoke that he was favorably impressed by his new client. After examining her with his usual inquisitive gaze, he composed himself and, with his eyes half closed and his fingertips pressed together, began to listen to her story. "I had been employed as a governess in the house of Colonel Spence Monroe for 5 years," she began. "But 2 months ago the colonel was transferred to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and went to America with his children. I was thus left without employment. I advertised in the newspapers, but with no result. At last my small savings were exhausted, and I scarcely knew what to do. There is a well-known governess agency in the West End called Westway's. Westway is the name of the founder, but the manager is a Mrs. Stoper. She sits in her little office, and the ladies in the waiting room are shown in one by one. She then opens her ledger to see whether there is a suitable position for them. Last week, when I went there as usual, I entered Mrs. Stoper's office, but this time she was not alone. Sitting beside her was a very stout, cheerful-looking man, with his double chin folded in layers over his collar and spectacles perched on his nose, who examined each woman who entered with the closest attention. The moment I came in, he sprang to his feet and turned to Mrs. Stoper. "That's it," he cried. "I've found exactly what I want. Splendid, splendid." And he rubbed his hands together in delight. His manner was so natural that it was a pleasure merely to watch him. "You are seeking employment, I believe?" "Yes, sir." "As a governess?" "Yes, sir." "And what salary do you ask?" I was receiving £4 a month in Colonel Spence Monroe's household. Throwing up his hands as if in indignation, he exclaimed, "Dear me, what a shocking injustice! How can a lady of such accomplishments be paid so little?" "I may not be as accomplished as you suppose, sir," I said. "A little French, a little German, music, drawing." Never mind," he cried. "That is not the point. What matters is whether a lady has the bearing and demeanor of a lady. The rest is of no consequence. If you lack these qualities, the children who are the guarantee of our future cannot be entrusted to you. But if you possess them, why should you accept a salary of less than 3 figures? Madam, in my house your salary would begin at £100 a year." I was in financial distress, and such an offer was extremely tempting. But perhaps noticing the look of amazement on my face, the man took out his wallet and continued, "It is also my custom to pay half the salary of the young ladies in my employment in advance. I wish them to be able to meet their traveling expenses and provide themselves with an appropriate wardrobe." As he said this, he smiled in such a way that his eyes were reduced to 2 tiny points of light in the wrinkles of his face. I had never in my life met a man so thoughtful and charming. The advance would have enabled me to settle my debts at once. Yet the whole affair seemed too extraordinary to be natural, and I wished to learn more before accepting. "May I ask where you live, sir?" I said. "In a pretty village in Hampshire, Beeches, 8 kilometers beyond Winchester. It is a very beautiful place, and our house is a very beautiful house." "And what would you expect of me?" "Only 1 child, a little rascal of 6. You should see how he kills cockroaches with his slipper." Bang, bang, bang. 3 of them gone in a moment. He leaned back and laughed again, his eyes once more disappearing into his face. The child's strange amusement surprised me, but since the man was laughing, I thought it might be a joke. Is that all you would require of me? Oh no, not only that, of course. You must do whatever my wife asks of you. But rest assured, the things she will ask will not be such as a respectable young lady could not do. Well, does that seem too much to ask? I should be happy to be of service. Very good. Now we come to the question of dress. We are people with somewhat eccentric tastes. But though eccentric, we are respectable. If we were to give you a dress to wear, you would not object to that small request, would you? This astonished me somewhat, but I answered no. If we asked you to sit here or there, would that trouble you? No. Or if we were to ask you to have your hair cut short before coming? At that moment, I could hardly believe my ears, Mr. Holmes. As you can see, I have quite handsome chestnut-colored hair. Why should I give it up? I'm afraid that would be impossible, I said. He fixed his eyes upon me and studied me closely. When he heard my answer, I saw his expression change. I'm afraid it is essential, he said. My wife insists upon it. You know how women are. They expect even their little wishes to be complied with. Well, will you have your hair cut or not? No, sir. I cannot do that, I replied firmly. Then there is nothing more to be done. It is a great pity, for you possessed all the other qualities we sought. Mrs. Stoper, we had better see the other ladies. Throughout this conversation, Mrs. Stoper had been busy with the papers before her and had not spoken a word. But at that moment, she looked at me with such a dissatisfied expression that I could not help thinking she felt deprived of a good commission. Do you wish your name to remain on our books? She asked. Yes, if you please. I hardly think it necessary, since you refuse even the most attractive offers, she replied sharply. I do not think we shall ever be offering you another position. Good day, Miss Hunter. She rang the bell on the desk, and the maid showed me out. When I returned home, my cupboard was nearly empty, and 2 or 3 unpaid bills lay upon the table. I began to think I had been foolish. These people might be eccentric, but at least they were willing to pay for it. Few governesses in England earn £100 a year. And what good were my hair to me? Many people had their hair cut short. What would it matter if I did the same? The next day, I began to think I might have been mistaken. The day after that, I was certain of it. I was almost ready to swallow my pride and return to the agency to ask whether the offer was still open when I received this letter from the gentleman. Here it is. Beeches Manor, Winchester. Dear Miss Hunter, Mrs. Stoper was kind enough to give me your address. I write to ask whether you have reconsidered your decision. I've spoken to my wife about you, and she very much wishes you to enter our service. In consideration of any inconvenience our request may cause you, we are prepared to offer you £30 for 3 months. That is £120 a year. Our requests are not unreasonable. My wife is very fond of a bluish-green shade and wishes you to wear a dress of that color in the house during the daytime. You need not incur any expense for such a dress, as my dear daughter Alice, who is presently at boarding school in Philadelphia, has one of that color. The things we may ask you to do while sitting here, or there will not be particularly troublesome. As for your hair, although its beauty is undeniably striking, we must insist upon its being cut. We hope that the increase in salary will compensate for the inconvenience. Your duties with regard to the child will be extremely light. Please enter upon your duties at once. If you inform me of your arrival time, I will meet you at Winchester with a carriage. Yours sincerely, Jeffro Rucastle. That is the letter, Mr. Holmes. I have decided to accept the position, but I did not wish to do so without first asking your opinion. Holmes smiled. If you have made up your mind, then the matter is settled. Would you not advise me to refuse the offer? I must confess that if I had a sister, I should not wish her to accept it. What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Holmes? I cannot decide without further information. Perhaps you have formed an opinion. I believe there's only one explanation for all this. Mr. Rucastle seems extremely kind and gentle. Perhaps his wife is insane, and he is trying to prevent her from being taken away to an asylum. For that reason, he may be indulging her wishes in order to keep her under control. That is possible. Indeed, when one considers the matter, it seems the most reasonable explanation. Nevertheless, whatever the truth may be, that house does not seem a suitable place for a young woman. But the money, Mr. Holmes, the money is good, exceedingly good. That is precisely what disturbs me. If they could hire a governess for £40 a year, why should they offer 120? There must be some reason. I thought that if I told you everything, and if I later needed your help, you would understand my situation. I should feel much stronger knowing I have your support. You may feel it. I can tell you that this little matter of yours is the most interesting case I have encountered in the past few months. In certain respects, it is highly original. If you should suspect anything, or if there should be any danger, what kind of danger could there possibly be? Holmes shook his head from side to side and said gravely, if we knew what kind of danger it was, then it would no longer be danger at all. However, whether by day or by night, a single telegram from you will bring me to your aid at once. That is enough for me, she said, rising from her seat. The anxious expression had vanished from her face. I shall go to Hampshire with a clear mind. I will inform Mr. Rucastle at once that I accept the position. Tonight, I shall cut my hair, and tomorrow morning I shall take the train to Winchester. After thanking Holmes with a few words and bidding us both farewell, she hurried out of the house. As the young woman descended the stairs with quick, determined steps, I remarked, at least she seems capable of taking care of herself. She will have to be, said Holmes anxiously. I am certain we shall hear from her again before long. My friend's prediction was not long in coming true. During the 2 weeks that followed, I often found myself thinking of the strange people with whom the poor young woman must now be dealing all alone. The excessively generous salary, the peculiar conditions, the light duties, all pointed to something abnormal. Were these merely eccentric demands, or was there some sinister design? Was the man truly kind-hearted, or was he a villain? It was impossible for me to know. Holmes, meanwhile, would sit for half an hour at a time, his brows knitted, paying no attention to anything around him, and whenever I attempted to raise the subject, he would silence me with a gesture and cry, "Information, information, information. One cannot make bricks without clay." And yet, each time, he would mutter that if he had a sister, he would never allow her to accept such a position. One night, just as I was preparing to go to bed and Holmes was about to begin one of his frequent chemical experiments that would last all night, a telegram arrived. Once Holmes set himself to these experiments, he would hunch over his test tubes and retorts, and I would find him in the same position in the morning as I'd left him the night before. He opened the yellow envelope, read the message, and tossed it toward me. Returning to his chemical work, he said, "Look up the train schedules." The telegram was brief and urgent. "Please come to the Black Swan Hotel in Winchester tomorrow. You must come. I am on the verge of losing my mind." Hunter, glancing sideways at me, Holmes asked, "Would you like to come as well?" "Of course," I replied. "Then look up the trains." Consulting the timetable, I said, "There's a train at 9:30 that arrives in Winchester at 11:30. That will suit us." In that case, I had better postpone my acetone analysis, for we shall need to be fresh tomorrow morning. The next day, at 11 o'clock, we were traveling toward England's ancient capital. Holmes was buried in the morning papers for most of the journey, But once we crossed the Hampshire border, he tossed them aside and began to study the landscape. It was a magnificent spring morning. The sky was clear and bright, and a few cottony clouds drifted slowly from west to east. Yet there was a sharp chill in the air that sapped one's energy. At the foot of the rolling hills winding through Aldershot, the small red and gray roofs of farmhouses rose among the fresh spring leaves. With the enthusiasm of one newly escaped from the fogs of Baker Street, I exclaimed, "How beautiful it is it not?" But Holmes shook his head sadly. "You know, Watson," he said, "having a mind like mine is something of a curse, for I view everything from the standpoint of crime. When you look at these houses, you see their beauty. I see how their isolation and distance from one another make crime all too easy." "For heaven's sake," I said, "what possible connection can there be between these charming cottages and crime? Such houses always fill me with dread. From my experience, I believe that even the worst districts of London witness less crime than these lovely, picturesque villages." "You are frightening me. The reason is obvious. In the city, what the law fails to do is accomplished by social pressure. Even the cry of a child or the fall of a drunkard in the most obscure alley will attract anger and attention from those nearby. Moreover, the machinery of justice in the city is so accessible that even the smallest complaint sets it in motion at once. In the city, there is but a single step between crime and the dock. But look at these scattered houses, each isolated, each inhabited by poor and ignorant people unfamiliar with the law. Who knows what devilish deeds and secret crimes are committed in such houses every year? If this woman had told me she was to work in Winchester itself, I should not have feared for her at all. What troubles me is the 8 kilometers in between. Still, she is not personally under threat. That's true. If she were, she would not have been able to come to Winchester to meet us. Quite right. Her liberty is not restricted. Then what I ask the matter? Do you have an explanation? Based on what we know, I could explain it in 7 different ways. But which explanation is correct can only be determined by further information. And there, you can already see the cathedral tower. We shall soon speak with Miss Hunter. The Black Swan Hotel stood on the main road not far from the station. When we arrived, the young woman was waiting for us. She had arranged a room for us, and our meal was laid out on the table. "I'm so glad you came," she said warmly. "You are both very thoughtful, but I truly do not know what to do. Your advice means a great deal to me." "Please," said Holmes, "tell us what has happened." "I will, but I must be quick, for I promised Mr. Rucastle I would return before 3 o'clock. He gave me permission to come into town this morning, but he does not know my purpose." Holmes stretched his long legs toward the fireplace, prepared to listen. "Please," he said, "tell us everything in order." "First of all, I must say that I have not been ill-treated in any way by Mr. or Mrs. Rucastle. Otherwise, I should be doing them an injustice. But there is something going on that I cannot understand, and it troubles me." "What is it that you cannot understand?" "The reason for their behavior. Let me tell you everything as it occurred. When I first arrived, Mr. Rucastle met me with a carriage and drove me to Beeches Manor. The surroundings were indeed as beautiful as he had described, but the house itself was not. It was a large, square building. It was painted white, but damp and weather had stained it all over. The house stood in the middle of its grounds. On 3 sides, it was surrounded by woodland, while the front faced the Southampton Road, which curved nearby. The land in front belonged to the house, but the woods at the back formed part of Lord Southerton's preserve. The few hornbeam trees from which the manor took its name stood directly before the drawing-room door. Mr. Rucastle was in excellent spirits during the drive. That evening he introduced me to his wife and child. Our conjectures at your Baker Street lodgings proved incorrect. The woman was not insane at all. She was much younger than her husband, pale-faced and quiet. Though her husband must have been at least 45, she could not have been more than 30. From her conversation, I gathered that they had been married for about 7 years, and that he had one daughter by his first wife, who was in Philadelphia. At a moment when his wife was absent, Mr. Rucastle told me that his daughter had gone to Philadelphia because she did not get along with her stepmother. Since I judged the girl to be at least 20, I was not surprised that she and her father's young wife should have disagreed. Mrs. Rucastle struck me as insignificant both mentally and physically. I formed neither a positive nor a negative opinion of her. She was almost a nonentity. I could see clearly that she devoted herself entirely to her husband and son. Her gray eyes never left them, and she endeavored to satisfy their every wish. Mr. Rucastle, with his jovial and frank manner, was very kind to his wife. I would say they were a harmonious couple, yet the woman harbored some hidden sorrow. I repeatedly saw her sink into deep, melancholy reveries, and I witnessed her weeping on several occasions. Sometimes I thought the cause lay in the child's nature, for I have never seen a more spoiled or cruel child. His body was somewhat small for his age, but his head was disproportionately large. His life seemed to consist of alternations between fits of rage and sullen gloom. His sole amusement was tormenting weaker creatures. He showed remarkable skill in setting traps for mice, small birds, and insects. However, I shall not dwell on this little monster, as he has little bearing on the matter. Whether relevant or not, said Holmes, I like details. I shall try to omit nothing of importance. The first unpleasant thing that struck me about the house was the appearance and conduct of the servants. Only a married couple were employed. The man, whose name was Toller, was extremely coarse, gray-haired, and constantly smelled of drink. Since I arrived, I have seen him dead drunk twice, yet Mr. Rucastle appeared to take no notice of it. His wife was a tall, powerfully built woman whose face never smiled. She was as silent as Mrs. Rucastle, but far less amiable. In short, they were an unpleasant pair, but fortunately, I spent most of my time in my room at the corner of the house and the adjoining nursery. My first 2 days at Beeches passed quietly. On the third day, Mrs. Rucastle came downstairs immediately after breakfast and whispered something to her husband. Turning to me, he said, yes, of course. Miss Hunter, we owe you our thanks for complying with our request and have your hair cut. I assure you that not the slightest bit of your beauty has been lost. Now we should like to see how the bluish-green dress looks on you. It is lying on your bed in your room. We should be obliged if you would be so kind as to put it on now. When I went to my room, the dress lay waiting on the bed. It was of a rare shade of blue, tinged faintly with beige. The fabric was excellent, though it was evident that it had been worn before. It fitted me perfectly, as though it had been made expressly for me. When Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle saw me in it, they exaggerated their admiration of how well it suited me. They were waiting in the large drawing room that extended across the entire front of the house. The drawing room had 3 windows reaching down to the floor, and a chair had been placed in front of the middle window, with its back to the glass. They asked me to sit in this chair. Mr. Rucastle then began pacing back and forth across the room, telling me the most absurdly amusing stories I had ever heard. You cannot imagine how funny they were. In the end, I was exhausted with laughter. Mrs. Rucastle, perhaps because she had no sense of humor, sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her face sad and anxious. After a little more than an hour, Mr. Rucastle told me that it was time for me to begin my duties for the day and that I should change my clothes and go to the nursery. 2 days later, the same thing occurred again. Once more I put on the bluish-green dress, sat before the window, and listened to those comical tales selected from Mr. Rucastle's vast repertoire and delivered with his inimitable flair. Then he handed me a novel with a yellow cover and asked me to read aloud, moving my chair slightly so that my shadow would not fall on the page. I read for about 10 minutes and had reached a particularly exciting passage when, before I could finish the sentence, he suddenly told me to stop reading and change my clothes. You can imagine how curious I was to discover the reason for these strange proceedings, Mr. Holmes. Their great care that I should not turn my face toward the window aroused my curiosity intensely. What was behind me? At first, I could not find out, but later I devised a way. My hand mirror had broken, and it occurred to me to hide a small fragment of it in my handkerchief. The next time, while laughing, I raised the handkerchief to my eye and, with little effort, saw that there was nothing immediately behind me. I was disappointed. But when I looked again, I thought I saw a small, bearded man in a gray suit on the Southampton Road, staring at me. The road in front of the house is busy, with many passers-by, but this man was leaning toward the fence that surrounded the grounds and was clearly watching us. When I lowered my handkerchief, I saw that Mrs. Rucastle was staring at me intently. She said nothing, but she must have guessed that I had been looking behind me with a mirror. She immediately rose and said, "Jeffro, there is an impertinent fellow standing on the road staring at Miss Hunter." "Could he be a friend of yours, Miss Hunter?" he asked. "I know no one here." "Good heavens! What insolence!" "Then turn around and signal to him to go away. It will be better to ignore him." No. Then he will linger about. Please turn around and motion him away with your hand." I did as he asked. At that very moment, Mrs. Rucastle drew the curtain. This happened a week ago. Since then, I have neither worn the blue dress, nor sat by the window, nor seen that man on the road again. "Please continue," said Holmes. "It sounds like a most interesting story. You may think these events unconnected, but on my first day at the house, Mr. Rucastle had taken me to a small outbuilding beside the kitchen door. As we approached, I heard the rattle of a chain and the movement of a large animal. Pointing to a gap between the boards, he said, "Look in there. Isn't it magnificent?" When I looked inside, I saw a pair of gleaming eyes and something lying curled up. Startled, I drew back, but my employer said, "Do not be afraid. That is Carlo, my dog. Though I call him mine, only my old groom Toller may approach him. We feed him once a day and sparingly, so that he remains ever alert. At night, Toller releases him. Woe betide anyone who enters the grounds then. Once he sinks his teeth into a man, there is no recovery. If you value your life, do not step outside the door at night for any reason whatsoever." This warning was not given in vain. 2 days later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I opened my bedroom window and looked out. It was a beautiful night. Under the moonlight, the lawn before the house shone as if in daylight. As I gazed, entranced by the scene, I suddenly noticed something moving beneath the hornbeam trees. When it came into the moonlight, I saw what it was. It was a dog as large as a calf, light brown in color. Its massive bones seemed ready to burst from its body. I could see its swinging jaws and black muzzle in the moonlight. That dreadful sentinel inspired more terror in me than any thief ever could. Now I shall tell you something most extraordinary. As you know, before leaving London, I had my hair cut. I wrapped it up and placed it at the bottom of my trunk. One evening, after putting the child to bed, I was examining the furniture in my room and arranging my belongings. There was a chest of drawers with 3 drawers. 2 were open and empty, but the bottom one was locked. I filled the 2 drawers with my clothes, but there were still garments left in my trunk. It annoyed me that I could not use the 3rd drawer. Thinking it might have been locked by oversight, I took out my keys and tried them. The first key fitted perfectly and the drawer opened. There was only one thing inside, and I'm certain you cannot guess what it was. My hair. I took it out and examined it. The color and thickness were the same. But how could this be? How had my hair found its way into that locked drawer? With trembling hands, I opened my trunk and took out its contents. My hair lay at the bottom. When I placed the hair from the drawer beside the hair from the trunk, I saw that there was no difference at all. It was utterly inexplicable. Though deeply shaken, I could make nothing of it. I returned the hair to the drawer, locked it again, and said nothing to the Rucastles, for I had done wrong in opening a locked drawer. You may have noticed, Mr. Holmes, that I am naturally observant. Before long, I had formed a mental map of the house. One wing appeared never to be used. It was entered through a door facing the Toller's room, but this door was always kept locked. One day, as I was going upstairs, I saw Mr. Rucastle emerge from this door with keys in his hand. Not a trace of his usual jovial expression remained. His cheeks were flushed, his brows drawn together in anger, and the veins in his temples were swollen. He locked the door and passed me without a word. This aroused my curiosity, so when my duties took me outside, I walked far enough to see the windows of that wing. There were 4 windows. 3 were filthy, but one had its shutters closed. None appeared to be in use. As I paced the garden, examining them, Mr. Rucastle approached me in his usual cheerful manner. "I hope you will excuse me, madam, if I passed you without greeting earlier. I was occupied with matters of the house." I told him it was of no importance. "By the way," I added, "you seem to have quite a few unused rooms. One even has its shutters closed." "I have a hobby of photography," he said. "I made myself a darkroom." "But how observant you are." "Quite extraordinary, really extraordinary." He spoke lightly, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw that it was not lightness at all. There was suspicion and unease there, not cheerfulness. That was the moment I realized there was something in those rooms that he did not want me to know about, Mr. Holmes. I burned to discover what it was. It was not mere curiosity. Yes, I was curious, but more than that, I felt a sense of responsibility. I felt that my entering that place might lead to something good. They say women have intuition. Perhaps it was that feminine instinct which guided me. Whatever the case, I knew something was there, and I was determined to enter that forbidden door. I succeeded only yesterday. I knew that Mr. Rucastle, as well as Toller and his wife, were occupied inside. Once I had even seen Toller carrying a black sack. Lately he had been drinking heavily, and last night he was completely drunk. When I went upstairs, the key was in the lock. He must have left it there in his drunken state. Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle were downstairs with the child. I had an excellent opportunity. I turned the key quietly, opened the door, and slipped inside. Before me lay a small corridor with no wallpaper on the walls and no carpet on the floor. At the end of the corridor, it turned sharply at a right angle. There I encountered 3 doors side by side. The first and third were open. The gloomy rooms beyond them were thick with dust. One had 2 windows, the other one. The windows were so filthy that the evening sunlight barely penetrated. The middle door was locked. Outside it stood the broad-barred side of an iron bedstead, one end fastened with a padlock to a ring in the wall, the other secured with a stout rope. The lock was not open, and the key was nowhere to be seen. There was no doubt that this heavily secured door belonged to the room with the closed shutters. Since light was seeping from beneath the door, the room could not have been dark. There must have been a skylight. As I stood in the corridor, wondering what lay behind that sinister door, I realized from the change in the light seeping through the gap and from the sound of footsteps that someone was inside. At that moment, terror nearly robbed me of my senses. My already strained nerves could bear no more. I turned and fled. It was as though a hand had seized my skirt, trying to hold me back, but I only wanted to escape as quickly as possible. I rushed down the corridor, and when I emerged through the door, I found myself in the arms of Mr. Rucastle, who was waiting outside. Asterisk. Smiling, he said, "So it was you? When I saw the door open, I guessed that you were inside." "I was terribly frightened," I said, scarcely able to speak. With an extremely fatherly and compassionate manner, he replied, "Ah, my dear lady, pray tell me, what was it that frightened you so?" His voice struck me as slightly exaggerated and artificial. I immediately became defensive. I foolishly entered the unused wing of the house, but it was so deserted and dim that I panicked and fled. What a dreadful and silent place it is. Looking straight into my eyes, he asked, "Is that all? Why do you ask? What had you thought?" I replied, "Why do you suppose I keep that door locked? I have no idea, so that those who have no business there do not enter. Do you understand?" The same pleasant smile was still on his face. If only I had known. No matter. Now you do know, and if ever you set foot through that door again. His smile suddenly twisted into an angry grin, and a diabolical fury appeared on his face. "I will throw you to the dog." I was so frightened that I cannot remember what I did afterward. I must have run to my room. When I came to myself, I was trembling in my bed. Then I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. I felt I had, but as I approached the house, a great fear seized me again. What if they had released the dog? Then I remembered that Toller, the only person who could approach the dog, had been dead drunk that night, and I realized it could not have happened. I entered quietly and spent the night half awake, thinking of meeting you today. It was not difficult to obtain permission to come to Winchester this morning, but I must return by 3 o'clock because Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle are going out this evening. Until they return, I must look after the child. I have told you everything that has happened to me, Mr. Holmes. Tell me, what does all this mean? And most importantly, what should I do? Holmes, and I listened to this extraordinary account as though under a spell. My friend rose, put his hands in his pockets, and began pacing back and forth across the room with that grave expression on his face. "Is Toller drunk at the moment?" he asked. "Yes. I heard his wife tell Mrs. Rucastle so." "Excellent. And the Rucastles will not be at home this evening, correct?" "Yes." "Is there a cellar or storeroom with a strong lock?" "Yes. There's a wine cellar." "I believe you have acted bravely and wisely in this matter, Miss Hunter. Could you perform one more act of courage? I would not ask this of you if I did not believe you capable of it. I will try. What do you want me to do?" "My friend Watson and I shall arrive at Beeches Manor at 7 o'clock. By then, the Rucastles will have gone, and I hope Toller will still be insensible. The only person who could hinder us is Mrs. Toller. If you can send her to the cellar on some pretext and lock the door behind her, our task will be greatly simplified." "I can do that." "Splendid. We shall handle the rest. There's only one logical explanation for all this. You were brought here to replace someone, and the person you replaced was imprisoned in that room. That much is obvious. I have no doubt that the person confined there was Miss Alice Rucastle. If I am not mistaken, they claimed she was in America. You were chosen because your height, appearance, and hair color resembled hers. Since the girl's hair had been cut due to an illness, yours had to be cut as well. By chance, you found her hair. The man standing on the road was her friend, most likely her fiancé. When you wore Alice's dress, you looked exactly like her. Each time he saw you laughing and in high spirits, they wanted him to believe that you were happy and no longer needed him. To prevent him from attempting secret contact with the girl, they released the dog at night. Up to this point, everything is perfectly clear. The most important element in this case, however, is the child's behavior. What has that to do with it? I protested. My dear Watson, you are a doctor. You constantly study parents in order to form opinions about their children. Have you not realized that the reverse is also possible? I often form my first judgment about parents by observing their children. The child's behavior is extraordinarily cruel. Whether he inherited this cruelty from his mother or, as I suspect, from that genial father of his, I cannot say. But in any case, I am certain that the poor girl was in grave danger. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Holmes," she said. "What I have experienced proves it. We must help that poor girl without delay. We must be extremely cautious, for the man we face is very cunning. We cannot act before 7 o'clock. We shall come to you then and unravel this mystery swiftly." We kept our word and arrived at Beeches Manor precisely at 7. We left our carriage in front of a nearby barn and approached on foot. When we saw the trees shimmering with a metallic glow in the last rays of the evening sun, we knew at once where we were. Miss Hunter, waiting for us at the door with a smile, confirmed it. "Were you able to do what I asked?" Holmes inquired. The crashing noises coming from below answered the question. "That is Mrs. Toller," she said. "I locked her in the cellar. Her husband is passed out on the kitchen floor. And these are the keys, the exact copies of Mr. Rucastle's. Remarkably well done." Holmes exclaimed with delight. "Now lead the way, and let us see where these dark dealings lead." We went upstairs, unlocked the forbidden door, and crossed the corridor until we reached the barricade Miss Hunter had described. Holmes cut the rope and removed the iron bars. He tried the keys one by one, but none fit the lock. When no sound came from inside, a grim expression crossed his face. "I hope we are not too late," he said. "Miss Hunter, I believe we shall have to enter without you. Put your shoulder to it, Watson. Let us see if we can break it open." We struck together, and the old, rotten door burst open at once. We rushed inside, but the room was empty. The only furnishings were a bed stuffed with straw, a small table, and a basket of laundry. The skylight was open. The girl had escaped. That villain realized Miss Hunter's intentions and moved his victim elsewhere, said Holmes. "But how?" "Through the skylight. We shall see how in a moment." He climbed onto the roof, gripping the window frame. "Of course," he shouted. "The end of a ladder leaning against the roof is visible. That is how they went." "But that's impossible," said Miss Hunter. "When the Rucastles left, that ladder wasn't there. He must have returned. I told you he was clever and dangerous. I hear footsteps on the stairs. If it is he, I shall not be surprised. Watson, you'd better have your revolver ready." Holmes had scarcely finished speaking when a huge, thick-set man appeared at the doorway, gripping a heavy club. At the sight of him, Miss Hunter screamed and shrank back against the wall, but Holmes sprang forward and confronted the man. "You villain," he shouted. "Where is the girl?" The fat man glanced around, then looked up at the skylight. "That is what I should be asking you," he roared. "You thieves! You spies! I've caught you. You are in my power now. I know what to do with you." Turning, he fled down the stairs at full speed. "He's gone to release the dog," Miss Hunter cried. "I'm armed," I said. "We had better shut the front door." Holmes shouted. We all ran downstairs. We had just reached the drawing room when we heard a dog's growl, followed by a scream that tore through the air. A red-faced man stumbled in through the kitchen door, his limbs trembling. "My God," he cried. "Someone has released the dog. It hasn't been fed for 2 days. Hurry, hurry, or there'll be a disaster." Holmes and I ran out of the house and around the corner, with Toller close behind us. A gigantic beast had sunk its teeth into Rucastle's throat. The man lay on the ground, writhing and screaming. I rushed forward and shot the animal through the brain. The dog collapsed, but its jaws were still locked in Rucastle's neck. After forcing them apart with difficulty, we carried the man inside. He was not dead, but his condition was grave. We laid him on the sofa in the drawing room and sent the now-sober Toller to fetch his wife so that he might explain what had happened. I did what I could to ease the man's pain. We were all gathered around him when a tall, thin woman entered through the door. "Mrs. Toller!" cried Miss Hunter. "Yes, miss." Mr. Rucastle released me from the cellar before going upstairs when he returned home. "But why did you not tell me of your plan? I would have told you not to trouble yourselves." "Ah," said Holmes, studying her closely. "It appears that Mrs. Toller knows more about this affair than anyone else present." "Yes, sir, that is so, and I am ready to tell you all I know." "Then please sit down, and let us learn the remaining matters that still lie in darkness." "You shall soon know everything," she said. "Had I not been locked in the cellar, I would have told you much earlier. And if this matter comes before the police, you may be assured that I shall stand by you, just as Miss Hunter will, as your friend. Miss Alice has never been happy since her father remarried. Her opinions were of no importance in that house, though matters were not so bad until she met Mr. Fowler at a friend's home. From what I learned, she was entitled to a share of her mother's inheritance, but she never pursued it and left its management entirely to Mr. Rucastle. He was satisfied with this, until a prospective son-in-law appeared. If Alice married, her husband might claim her rights. To prevent this, Mr. Rucastle tried to force Alice to sign a document transferring her rights to him even after marriage. She refused. He then tormented her relentlessly until the poor girl fell into brain fever and hovered between life and death for 6 weeks. She eventually recovered, but she was never the same again. She was like a shadow of her former self. Her beautiful hair had been cut. Yet the young man never abandoned her. "For what you tell us, it is not difficult to guess what followed," said Holmes. "Mr. Rucastle then imprisoned his daughter in that room, did he not?" "Yes, sir. And by bringing Miss Hunter from London, he hoped to rid himself of Mr. Fowler." "Exactly so, sir. But Mr. Fowler, like any good sailor, was a determined man. He laid siege to the house. He met you and succeeded, financially and otherwise, in winning you over. Mr. Fowler was a most courteous and generous gentleman," Mrs. Toller said calmly. "And thus you ensured that your husband was kept well supplied with drink and arranged a ladder when the master of the house was away." "You have guessed correctly, sir." "Precisely so. We owe you an apology." "Mrs. Toller," said Holmes, "you have dispelled all our doubts. I believe those approaching must be the doctor and Mrs. Rucastle. Watson, we had better return to Winchester with Miss Hunter, for our present position may not be entirely lawful." Thus the mystery of Beeches Manor was resolved. Mr. Rucastle did not die, but neither did he recover. He lived on, entirely dependent upon his devoted wife. Mr. and Mrs. Toller remain in service at the manor, perhaps because they know too much to be dismissed. Mr. Fowler and Alice were married with special permission in Southampton the day after their escape. Mr. Fowler is now employed as an official on the island of Mauritius. My friend Sherlock Holmes, curiously enough, never inquired after Miss Hunter once the case was concluded. I know that Miss Hunter is now the headmistress of a private school in Walsall, where I am certain she is doing excellent work.